When reading through the Gospels, one of the things that becomes very clear is just how much criticism Jesus took. He was criticized by the Pharisees, by religious leaders, by the Romans, by teachers, by scribes. Even members of his own family would criticize him. Jesus was criticized a lot. So we're going to talk about that today and a way to have a new perspective on this idea of criticizing Jesus. So let's get started. So Jesus was criticized a lot, and sometimes it was very harsh, very direct, in-his-face criticism. Other times it wasn't quite so harsh, but it was still definitely criticism. No matter what, though, he continued on with his mission. He continued on with his preaching. He continued to follow through with his reason for coming to earth in the first place. And every time that he was criticized, we have an opportunity to learn. Every criticism of Jesus and his response, it gives us a new perspective on his life, on his ideas, and on his ministry. In these moments, we learn how people around Jesus viewed him at the time. Some of them were afraid of him and afraid of the consequences of what he taught. Others were angry with him, upset that what he was teaching, those were things that went against their own ideas and their own thinking. And in each response, again, we learn more, and we learn more about Jesus himself. Now, in this conversation, it's important that we don't automatically jump in line against those who are criticizing Jesus. We need to step back and consider things from their perspective. It doesn't mean they're right or wrong. I just want you to think of things from their perspective. Almost all of them were doing what they thought was the correct thing, the expected behavior, the right thing of someone who was following the Old Testament law. They were doing what was culturally acceptable and correct at the time, and their criticism came from that point of view. One example of this is from the Gospel of Matthew. In chapter 9, Jesus faces criticism from people who were disciples of John the Baptist. John the Baptist was a strict and devout man, and his followers, they were as well. They saw that Jesus and his disciples, they weren't strictly following the rules about fasting. At that point in time, fasting was an important part of Judaism, and it was a common practice for observant Jews to fast 2 days a week from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. However, it seems that Jesus and his followers, they didn't fast during that time, and they didn't fast on those days. They were not doing what was considered the culturally correct thing to do. In the response of Jesus, it's important to note that he did not disagree with them or start arguing with them. After all, it was true that culturally, fasting for those hours on those days, that was expected. So instead of an argument, he shares something to help them think of a new perspective. He shared the story of how rabbis had announced that people celebrating a wedding, they're able to skip religious obligations and observances that would pull them from their joy of that celebration. He's reminding them that pausing normal routines, it's acceptable under certain situations. And importantly, when people are around Jesus, they want to celebrate. He teaches that just like celebrating a wedding, we are to celebrate in Jesus, only it's not for a moment, it's for our whole lifetime. We're to view every day as a new opportunity to celebrate. So Jesus didn't argue or hide anything. Instead, he made a point to highlight why his disciples were doing what they were doing. It wasn't simply to ignore a custom or to be stubborn. It was to joyfully celebrate the new life that Jesus brings. Jesus continues in his reply to compare the life that's found in following him with new wine. He mentions how no one would put new wine into an old wineskin, and instead the new wine is put into a new wineskin so that both are preserved. This may seem like an odd response to us today, but Jesus is teaching here about having a perspective that includes flexibility with this new thing. Now, while today wine is sold in glass bottles, they're pressurized, they're sealed, back then wine was stored in bags of leather. So when new wine was put into a new wineskin, it allowed it to still ferment, there was gas being created, there was an expansion that would happen within the wineskin. If that new wine was put into an old rigid wineskin, the bag would split apart, the forces of the gas expanding, all the wine would be lost. So the new wine is put into the new wineskin for its flexibility. Jesus is saying to the people that what they're seeing in him, it's like new wine. And he's suggesting they have flexibility to accept him and his followers, even when they might be saying something or doing something that isn't culturally acceptable. because sometimes following Jesus is such a new perspective, and it's such a new lifestyle that the current ways of doing things just don't fit. And that is most definitely a cause for a joyful celebration. Now head over to significantman.com and sign up for Intel. It's a free weekly email series that I write. Sometimes it's a devotion, sometimes it's inspiration, sometimes it's something for you to think about as you get through the week. It's fast, it's free. Head over to significantman.com and sign up for Intel today. And please be sure to subscribe to this show wherever you listen to your podcasts. Rate it and review. Your ratings and your reviews, they really help other people find the show. So thank you for that. All right, enjoy the next show.